Right, let's get into it. It's the weekly market view. I am the part-time trader. I will kick off like I do every week by reminding you that nothing you see in this video or that you might see on my Twitter feed, my X feed over on @PartTimeCharts is financial advice. This video is purely for entertainment purposes only, as is everything else that I produce on either my YouTube channel or over on X. I would hate to think of anybody making financial or investment decisions off the back of my musings, so please see them as hopefully an interesting addition to your week, hopefully some light entertainment, but nothing more than that. Right, let's kick off. We're going to do a quick roundup this week of where we're at with markets. I believe, like looking at the charts, I believe it's been a relatively uneventful week. For all the noise about Trump's tariffs, and earlier in the week, obviously, a lot of excitement that he was seemingly putting some of those plans on pause for a little while. And the market hasn't actually really done very much in reality. And you can see that here, looking at the last couple of 3-day candles on the NASDAQ. If we zoom in on the daily, we started the week down here in the 17,300 region. We've rallied up by a couple of $1,000, which, is a sizable move. I think we had a 12% up day on the NASDAQ, which doesn't happen very often. But in reality, I mean, looking at the bigger picture, in the grand scheme of things, we've not really done very much, let's be honest. And there's certainly nothing in the chart on the NASDAQ to me that would make me sway from my really quite heavily bearish disposition that I've been talking you guys through for the last month or so. I still think we are in the early stages of a gigantic correction, and one that in the rearview mirror, when all is said and done, I think we'll look back on it and it will be considered on a par at least with the types of crashes that we've seen in 2000 and 2008. So no real reason for me to change my perspective at the moment. Markets look weak. We've had this uptrend since the bottom of the 2022 correction that has been in place for a couple of years, that broke back in February. And exactly as I've called, we've seen some serious downsides. So on the equity front, all has been pretty quiet. Not really an awful lot more to say. Interestingly, gold has shown a lot of strength this week, rocketing back to all-time highs. And as you can see here, we had a momentary break of this uptrend back at the beginning of the week, where on the 7th of April, we started to break this uptrend. Since then, we've seen a reclaim and a big shoot to the upside. And bigger picture on gold, nothing has really changed for me. I've been saying for weeks, this breakout here is massive. I think we are still in the relatively early days of a major trend on gold that I expect will produce upside for at least the next sort of 18 to 24 months, potentially a bit longer. So interesting to see how strong commodities have been. I think there were a lot of people that expected gold to roll over as the stock market started to show weakness, and if anything, we've seen the complete opposite. Last couple of months, we've seen real weakness in equities, and gold continues to shoot for new all-time highs. I anticipate that trend lasting for quite some time yet, and I'm still really bullish on equities. Similar picture on silver, one of the other major equities. We had a breakdown earlier in the week. A breakdown a couple of weeks back, a week ago on Thursday the 3rd of April, where we saw the price sell off in line with some of the broader conditions that we saw in the market. Equity sold off quite heavily last week and silver followed them down. For a while, there were big question marks over silver strength versus gold. Gold looked like it was holding up a lot more effectively as markets tanked last week. But you can see here this uptrend that has been in place since back in March has now been reclaimed. We've tapped this broader trend line that actually dates back to October 23. And I can see new not all-time highs, but new highs on the horizon for silver over the coming days and weeks. And if I zoom out again, big picture on silver, something that I've been flagging for some time. This is the 6 month chart, so each candle represents 6 months. And I think there's reason to be really, really bullish here. This looks like a absolutely ginormous cup and handle pattern. I'm not normally a big fan of meme patterns. I think they're useful as part of your analysis, but often the patterns that are most easy for retail traders to spot are the ones that are least likely to play out. But on a higher time frame, something like this definitely catches my attention, because my primary thesis is that equities are going to struggle for quite some time, and that gold leads the way for commodities, and assets that have got real hard value are going to do really, really well over the next couple of years. And I certainly see that in the chart here. This giant formation goes all the way back to the beginning of the 80s, before most of us were even a twinkle in our dad's eye. And I expect this strength, once it picks up a head of steam, to really build some momentum. I think once this level breaks, we're going to see a sharp increase in the price of silver. And as most of you know, my thesis on equities and on gold and commodities is that inflation returns at some point. And I think there are some really fundamental market conditions that might support that, from the tariffs, from the global instability that we see in the kind of political and macro environment. I think there is reason to believe that inflation is going to return in a big way, that we will see a combination of economic stagnation and inflation, which is often known as stagflation, and that we're going back to a period that is akin to what we saw in the 1970s. Coincidentally, the 1970s was a time in which silver flourished, and you see this appreciation from the sort of $1.40 region up into close to $40, $38 in the space of a decade. I mean, extreme gains to be had in those types of market conditions, and it's my bet that we're going to see something similar over the coming months and years on silver. The one that has thrown me, though, has been oil. Lots of you know that I've been really bullish oil, and a big part of my rationale for being bullish oil is that in this kind of environment, if we're heading into stagflation, if commodities like oil and like gold and silver, are going to do really well, then I anticipate that oil follows. And if you pull up a long-term chart, a 3 month or a 6 month chart of oil, and then you compare the price of oil to the price of gold over that time, you see that actually on a high enough time frame, there's actually a pretty solid, quite stable correlation between the two of them. So with gold breaking out, I've been anticipating for some time that oil will follow, despite the fact that lots of people have been bearish. But look, I won't lie to you, I expected this support here to hold. You see we've got multiple touches on this big support line that dates all the way back to 2019. And as we were kind of compressing here over recent weeks, I anticipated that this was more likely to break to the upside, but that support gave way last week, and what has happened since is that we've seen continued weakness even in the oil market. Another way of looking at oil is that we are seeing some level of support on this downtrend that was broken back in 2021, which has held a support a couple of times. For me, we're in a no trade zone. I'm not interested in any shorts on commodity. I will be looking to go long if the market starts to show some strength, and I've already been building some positions in oil equities over recent months that I've not sold out of. They've suffered a little bit on this pullback, but not disastrously. And as I've said on X, for me, if we start to reclaim this really key zone here, this green arrow would be the trigger for me to start thinking about scaling into positions in a more sizable way, either going long on oil equities or thinking about trading futures on oil itself with the target up here. But that scenario only works if we reclaim this level here. So which you can see this pink zone on this chart. I would only be thinking about longs if we started to hold above this pink zone. Until then, no trade for me. And like I say, I have been surprised by the weakness in oil relative to gold, but the market is full of surprises, and you've got to roll with the punches. I think as long as we're down beneath this key support and resistance zone, no reason for me to be bullish on oil. The dollar is the other one that has thrown me in recent weeks. So I didn't anticipate that we would sell off in the way that we have done. And I'll be totally honest, I was one of very few people calling back in August, September last year for a bottom here, and benefited from longing up into this region. But since then, I was expecting to see, particularly as equity started to roll over, I was expecting to see more sustained strength on the dollar. We haven't seen that. The dollar has rolled over in a really big way. And I've laid out two scenarios here. I still think, given the weakness we're seeing in equities, I have zero reason to be bullish on indexes, on tech stocks. And I think if we do see some sort of crisis, I find it hard to believe that the dollar isn't going to appreciate as probably the currency that is most in demand globally as people flee from risk on assets. And so I've painted this green scenario where I can see, we're back into this major support and resistance zone. If that holds, and perhaps if the bottom of this sort of trend line here holds, maybe we see some sort of accumulation cylinder, which ends up in price, massively appreciating over the coming months, and we retest the top of this ascending channel before selling off. I mean, longer term, I think the dollar is painting a really interesting pattern that tells me that there is big weakness ahead for the dollar over the coming years and possibly decades. But in the short term, I'm anticipating that it benefits from uncertainty and turmoil in the wider market. So look, for me, as long as we hold this grey box here, this big support and resistance zone, I'm anticipating more upside at some point, probably one of the few that is. But were we to break down, and certainly were we to give up this trend line here at the bottom of this rising channel, I would be thinking of flipping short on the dollar. So for now, no major development. Yes, we've seen some weakness, but we've only ended up back at a key zone, and I anticipate buyers to step in here, particularly if markets continue to fluctuate as they have done recently and we see continued downside. And just interesting to note, if I just pull up the S&P, it's interesting that in the first leg down of the 2007-2008 crisis, the dollar fell with markets, and we've seen something similar here, right? The peak in the S&P coincided with a peak on the dollar, but then what happened as the S&P started to consolidate before its second leg down? You saw this precipitous rise in the dollar as people flooded out of equities and into what they saw as a safe haven. So I'm seeing the potential for something similar to play out this time. I certainly wouldn't be flipping bearish on the dollar at this massive support zone, but let's keep an eye on it and see what happens over the coming days. Right, so let's dig into crypto. Let's start with lower time frame on Bitcoin. Nothing has really changed here. You will recall, let me pull up a slightly different chart. You will recall that for some time now, last couple of weeks, I have been talking about potential upside into this 100k region. Look, quite simply, guys, we haven't broken out yet. So I think there's still risk that if equities roll over, we could see weakness in Bitcoin and perhaps this pattern gets blown apart. I do like the fact from a bullish perspective that we came down this week and we swept these lows and we reclaimed. But until we see a break on the daily time frame of this downtrend, I'm not even entertaining longs. So, for me, bigger picture hasn't changed. I still think Bitcoin is going to go sub 10k in 26, 27. Short term, we could see some upside, but right now, until this trend line breaks, I won't be gambling on that. And likewise, nothing really to report on Ethereum. If Bitcoin showed some strength, I could see Ethereum doing something similar over the short term, potentially a move back into this area before rolling over. If we got up here, that for me would be an amazing short trigger. A retest of this area coinciding with BTC hitting that 100k mark. I'd be really interested in shorts. That is probably all there is to say this week. I did tell you I was going to keep it short and sweet. I'll end with a quick chart for Solana. This is lower time frame, so I've posted many times the higher time frame picture, which hasn't changed. I do believe that Solana is going back to around about $5, potentially as low as $3 in 26, 27. Call me crazy, but check out the higher time frame charts for some of the rationale on that. On the lower time frame, look, we've broken this massive support zone, which dates back to this time last year, March 2024. And here we're simply back testing it. So no reason for me to be thinking about flipping into longs until we see some solid reclaim of this area, in which case I've outlined a couple of targets. But for now, my bias is bearish, and that potentially gives me an indication of where Bitcoin might be heading over the short term too. So if Bitcoin breaks that downtrend, 100k could be on the cards. I suspect we'd see some upside into at least this region here for Solana before rolling over. If not, it's very possible that we just get rejected here and we head lower. So risk reward for me in this area favors shorts at the moment, but a reclaim would change that picture and I'd be thinking about going long. Pretty uneventful this week. There's not a lot that I can cover that I haven't already covered in previous videos. I hope some of this has been useful just as a quick update. I wish all of you a fantastic weekend. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully some fresher content next week, depending on what the market gives us. I will speak to you all soon.